Hello, everyone. Welcome into today's episode of Connor and Coverage. Seasons are changing, coaches are talking, and we're live here at SEC Media Days in Nashville, previewing the latest in Georgia football, news, notes, and other things to come big out of this weekend. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Connor and Coverage. A little bit later than we traditionally like to start, but drove up to Nashville here today. Had a little bit of news to pop up. Obviously, Georgia releases its schedule, or not its schedule, excuse me, its roster for the 2023 season. Some New Jersey numbers. That story is live on DawgNation. You can check that out there. I'm in my hotel room in Nashville. I just got here maybe about 40 minutes ago-ish. SEC Media Days are this week here in Nashville. It was the first time, I believe, that they are here. They were in Atlanta last year. Traditionally, they have been in Hoover as well. Georgia is set to speak on Tuesday. Tomorrow, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey will kick things off, as well as I know LSU is going tomorrow, and there are two other teams as well. Georgia's big day is on Tuesday. We'll have live coverage throughout the week for you. Obviously, Brennan Adams is DawgNation Daily Monday through Friday, but Mike Griffith here on hand. As mentioned, Georgia will be speaking on Tuesday. You've got Kirby Smart, who you will hear from. We've got Brock Bowers, Cedric Van Pran, and Kamari Lassiter here speaking as well. Plenty news and notes coming from them. Obviously, some updates. It's been a while since we got certainly talked to players last on G-Day. And then obviously Kirby Smart did a small media gathering last week. He will obviously have a much larger presence this week, getting up in front of the national media, answering any and all questions as it pertains to the Georgia football program and where things go from there. Should be, in my opinion, a very interesting sort of week for Smart, and we'll get into that a little bit here tonight on the program. But I think the first thing that I want to point out and talk about here is, why this week is going to feel different for Georgia. And look, it has not been a perfect offseason for Georgia by any means. You heard Kirby Smart last week talk about the speeding violations and the need for Georgia to be better there in that aspect of that. But as I sort of expect, and I think we'll see, I think Georgia voted as the team to win the SEC this season. I think that there are some questions at Alabama. I think LSU has some things that they still need to go out and prove. And so because of that, I think, Georgia, well, yes, they do have to replace some key pieces on defense. There is a new quarterback, most likely to be Carson Beck. I'm sure we will hear plenty of questions about Mr. Beck this week. New offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo. Despite those questions, I believe that the national belief in Georgia is so high that they're actually, for the first time in Kirby Smart's tenure, going to be picked to win the SEC. That has not happened under Smart, as surprising as that is. They have won the SEC twice. They've won a national championship twice under Kirby Smart. And yet, because of that, and because of the turnover, and really, I think because of the presence of Alabama, they have not been the favorite going into to win the SEC the next season. Even last year, national championship, with Georgia losing so much. I do think that, again, a year ago was maybe understandable. That team had Bryce Young, that team had Will Anderson, and again, Georgia 8 starters off that championship defense. Plenty of contributors on offense there as well. New defensive coordinator with Glenn Schumann taking on a larger role. What were you going to see? And while, yes, there are a lot of similar questions this time around. New quarterback in Carson Beck, as we touched on before. New offensive coordinator. You got to replace some big names on the defensive side of the ball. Despite all of that, you've got Georgia in a position where, off-field stuff aside, in terms of on-field product, Alabama has way more questions. New offensive coordinator. Their quarterback situation seems much more dire than what Georgia has, along with some of the replacements that they have to make on the defensive side of the ball. Well, yes, I think this Alabama team is talented and in some regards is being overlooked. It's at least a little interesting to me that, a guy that Alabama went into the portal to get, Tresman Marshall, who's probably going to start for them, an inside linebacker, was not going to play a whole lot for Georgia in this coming season. He would have obviously been a player for this team and a rotational player, but similar to the role that he had last year, and I think Marshall knew he was not getting more playing time than, say, Shmal Munden or Jamon Dumas-Johnson. And so I think that maybe speaks to, at least in some positions, where those two rosters are. I do expect Alabama still to be voted the team most likely to win the SEC West, narrowly holding off an LSU team that, has a lot of admirers. I think they've probably got one of, if the best quarterbacks in the league in Jaden Daniels. I think Garrett Nussmeier is a quality backup, maybe the best backup in the league, a guy that would, I believe, start for a handful number of teams there. You have some interesting pieces. I think this was a team, LSU last year, that was maybe a year ahead of where they were expected to be coming into the 2020 or coming into the Brian Kelly regime. And for them to year one to get to Atlanta for the SEC championship game to beat Alabama, I think that is a team a lot of people see on the rise. Now, I would point out when it comes to LSU, and I'm a guy who I came out of last season saying, I think I might pick LSU to win the West. As we've gotten deeper into the season, I'm more skeptical of that. And while, yes, they have some very talented players, Harold Perkins, Mason Smith on the defensive line as he recovers from an ACL injury. They bring back both offensive tackles from a season ago. There's some real talent there. Last year's LSU season was not as rosy as I think some of us are remembering it and looking back on it. You've got, that was a team that got blown out by Tennessee. It was a team that got blown out by Georgia. And while, yes, they were able to move the ball, I think if Georgia wanted to score 70 in that game, in the SEC championship game, they would have. That was a team that also lost to Texas A&M at the end of the season against an A&M team that was pretty lifeless against every other team except for LSU. And you can fairly point out, well, Connor, two of those losses came at the end of the season. But when we're picking SEC champions, like, could LSU go into Tuscaloosa this year and beat Alabama? I could see a world where that happens, where the Alabama offense struggles to come together and LSU takes another step forward with what they have and the continuity that they have on both sides of the ball there. But is LSU going to be the team that is able to, on a week in, week out basis, win those games that they're not necessarily supposed to? I don't know if they've gotten quite there yet. And so I think while Alabama, yes, has their questions, I still feel maybe a little bit more comfortable picking them. But, the reality is, and part of this too, I think, goes back to how down the SEC East is. Florida is not the program that it needs to be for Georgia to have a real rival. I think Tennessee, while it did some very nice things last year, I think it is in a similar spot with LSU, with a lot of people wanting to see, okay, you lost a lot off of last year's team, a lot of NFL talent. Your starting quarterback, Hendon Hooker, your top two receivers in Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt. Darnell Wright was a first-round pick. You lose a lot of talent off that offense last year. And while Josh Heupel's scheme is very unique, there's always, I think, some room to be questioned in terms of how quickly they're able to sort of turn things around and show that maybe that offense, at least anyway, might be player-proof. So we'll see there, especially with Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton. While he has certainly garnered some admirers because of his physical talents, he's also a guy that's been benched twice in his college career already. And so, while, yes, Carson Beck is also an unknown product, I think with Joe Milton, I'm a little bit more cautious than maybe perhaps I would be with Carson Beck, just given we've seen him in two different spots, Michigan and Tennessee, him be named the starter and really struggle when he gets on the field in a starting capacity. And so, a little bit older now, more time in that Heupel system. I'll be really interested to see sort of the way that is talked around him this week. As far as Georgia, you're going to have the off-field questions. You're going to have some national media types here looking to make a name for themselves and say, oh, we gave Kirby Smart the hard questions and asked him the tough questions. And he's going to answer them, and he knows that, and he knows this hasn't been an ideal offseason. He had said as much a week ago when he spoke to reporters in Athens. And so I think, he's obviously going to have to answer a lot of those questions. And from my perspective, I'm interested in seeing how balanced there is in terms of, on-field football questions and culture questions that he has to sort of go through and answer this week. Because I think, had Georgia had a more normal offseason, one that did not see, Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix tragically lose their lives in a car accident hours after the national championship parade. In a more normal offseason, how are we talking about Georgia? This is a program that is trying to win an unprecedented third straight national championship, something that has not been done since the 1930s when Minnesota was doing it. And I would point out Minnesota did not have to go to a college football playoff nor play in a conference as rugged as the SEC. Although, I can't comment on the Roosevelt era Big Ten, how that conference was back then. I was not alive at that point in time, not watching football at that point. And so, it's a Georgia program that, look, I think in some regards they've earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to replacing talent and having new guys come in and out of the program. And so, yes, you lose Jalen Carter, who is an incredible talent, a top 10 player in this past NFL draft. Nolan Smith was a key leader for this program. Stetson Bennett was a Heisman Trophy finalist for Georgia a season ago. And because of what Georgia brings back, and because of the stability within this program, and because of the way that Georgia recruits, this team is still as talented, if not the most talented team in the country. Like Brock Bowers will be the best football player here this week. Cedric Von Pran is probably the best center in the country. I think Kamari Lassiter is a guy that has All-American potential if he continues to develop over the course of this season. And so with all that in mind, Georgia's not bringing a quarterback. They're not bringing. I don't believe any of those guys were 5-star prospects coming out. None of those guys are super big newsmakers. They are not, in my opinion, going to draw huge crowds because of who they are as individuals, as opposed to say a Jaden Daniels, maybe even say a Kool-Aid McKinstry type player for Alabama. But those guys are as good as any, not just in the SEC, but in college football at large. And the fact that Georgia has 3 of those guys at least, and probably even more, Javon Bullard is a talented player. Dominic Lovett is a guy coming over from Missouri who earned some really spectacular reviews this spring. Tate Ratledge is a really talented player on the offensive line. Plenty of talent throughout this team. I think the secondary, you have Bullard, you have Malachi Starks, Jamon Dumas-Johnson is certainly talented, Shema Munden as well. I think with all that in mind, you're going to hear a lot of just about how talented this Georgia team is, and sort of as well how the players, at least anyway, are gearing up for trying to win a 3rd straight national championship. It's been attempted before. Alabama last did it in the 2013 season, got unbeaten for the first 11 games of the season, and then in the 12th game there was the kick 6, and they sort of ran out of gas, and then they lost their bowl game to Oklahoma that year. So you can sort of see how quickly these things sort of slip there. And so with Georgia, I guess, obviously, again, culture is going to be a main talking point this week. But I am interested in seeing, what the discussion is around Georgia in terms of being asked these questions and whatnot. And so I'll be interested how that goes there. As far as some of the other SEC storylines, I'm interested in seeing the way people talk about Billy Napier in Florida. Obviously, that's Georgia's biggest rival. They're in a very different spot than where Georgia is right now. And this is a team that I think needs to make some real strides this season, but might not have the roster to do so. And so I'll be interested in seeing the tone that Billy Napier takes there. 2 other SEC East teams that interest me, Eli Drinkwitz from Missouri. Anytime that guy gets in front of a microphone in a big public setting, he says something interesting. And look, Missouri gave Georgia more trouble than anyone in the SEC last season. They've got some talented players on there. And while that is a game being played at Georgia this year, that's a team where, if they get better quarterback play, I do think that there's enough around there just maybe see them make a leap. And then Shane Beamer at South Carolina, I think a guy who is trying to replicate what Kirby Smart is doing at Georgia, has some success there. And that is a guy who is not afraid to make a statement, go viral. He's recreated the famous Spurrier meme at SEC Media Days before. Obviously, whenever he talks about Georgia, he does something viral in those regards. And so I'll be interested in sort of seeing what we say about those 2 teams. Obviously, Alabama, and just I think the space that they've always occupied in college football under Nick Saban, sort of the way we talk about them and what they look like, I think will be very interesting this week as far as the way things go there. Player-wise and, predicted order of finish. Again, I think that was my main topic here tonight. I think Georgia's going to be predicted to win the SEC. That is something that has not happened under Kirby Smart. I know that means very little. Does not always mean the case that they're going to win the SEC at the end of the season. Alabama was predicted to do so last year, and they didn't even make it to Atlanta. But I do think it'll show that, hey, this is a Georgia program that in some regards, they are getting that level of respect from a national standpoint of this is the premier conference. And while, look, Georgia won't care about that, I'm sure they're going to find some way to turn that into doubt. I'm sure someone this week is going to be brave enough to say that, Georgia's going to go 5 or 8-4 or something along those lines on a radio interview. I'm sure that the many wonderful SEC network analysts, some are going to predict them to lose to teams like, say, South Carolina and Auburn, Tennessee, whoever, Ole Miss, whoever is on Georgia's schedule. I'm sure that there will be some SEC network analysts that will go out there, try to make a name for themselves. Hey, they're going to lose to this team. And, we saw that happen a few times last year. I think Takeo Spike said Georgia was going to lose to South Carolina. Georgia won that game 48-7. I think Chris Doering said Kentucky was going to beat Georgia. Georgia won that game 16-6. So that's just sort of par for the course when you're a program like Georgia. And so while you do have analysts making sort of trendy upset picks, I think this week you're also going to see people sort of give Georgia, the way that Alabama has been treated in the past in terms of respect from a national talking point standpoint. And so with that in mind, let's open it up for comments and questions, thoughts, football-related things you guys want to ask about and discuss. I will gladly answer them. We'll probably go about another 10 minutes here. Busy couple minutes really so far, obviously. Georgia put out freshman jersey numbers. I'm going to try to do these off the top of my head for the summer enrollees anyway. Troy Bowles, number 0. Daniel Harris, number 15. Chris Peel, number 20. Let me see. Actually, I can do this the correct way. It is the top story on DawgNation. You can make sure to check that out and see it there. Let's see. Updated. There we go. Troy Bowles, 0. Daniel Harris, 15. Chris Peel, 27. Kyron Jones, 37. Interestingly, listed as an athlete, but I expect him to be a defensive back and ultimately a safety there. Lenneth Whitehead, the Tennessee transfer, a running back, number 41. Kelton Smith, number 54. He's going to be an offensive guard. Bo Hewley, offensive tackle, 59. Jamal Merriweather, 72. And then rounding things out, Peyton Woodring, the kicker, who I ultimately expect to win the starting kicking job, number 91. And so we're here in Nashville all week, plenty to talk about. Made the drive up today. I would like to give a special shout out to my friend Cole, who I don't know if he's watching or not, but when he was dating his now wife, they were doing long distance at the start. He lived in Athens, she lived in Nashville, and multiple times a month he would make the drive, and occasionally she would make the drive as well, from Athens to Nashville. I made that drive today. That drive is wildly unfun, in a big part wise because of the traffic in Chattanooga. I do not know why it is like this, but every time you drive through there, anyone that has made that drive, make that drive from Atlanta or wherever they are in the state to Nashville later this year when Georgia plays Vanderbilt on October 15th. Anyone that has made that drive just sits in traffic in Nashville, Chattanooga for some amount of time. For me, it was 30 minutes, just not really moving, just sitting there. And it's just the worst because you're just trying to get there. It's a not great drive as it is, especially when you have to drive through the mountains if you're someone like me with some anxieties. But we made it here. We're in Nashville. We're going to bring you a ton of great content this week, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And so with that in mind, let us open it up to some comments, thoughts, questions, what you guys are saying in the chat. Rutledge, that traffic in Chattanooga is just not very fun. This is a good point, Becky. And as far as injuries, I think the two big ones that we expect to at least, we're going to ask Kirby about it. I don't know how much kind of clarity we're going to get from him on it, obviously. The two big ones and Branson Robinson. That missed spring practice, your Marvin Jones Jr.'s, your Jalen Walkers, guys who had sort of those shoulder injuries that they get taken care of. Kendall Milton, who had a hamstring injury. Those guys are going to be good to go for the start of fall practice. Branson Robinson and Shmuel Munden, there is some uncertainty as far as where they are going to be in terms of their health and status. Obviously, Kirby described both as lower extremity / foot / ankle injuries. And so I know from my own talking to people within the program, Shmiles is a little bit more serious, and there's a thought that he might actually miss some time during the regular season there. I think Branson, while he may not be 100% cleared to go at the start of camp, should be ultimately good to go for the first game there. But I think those are the two big names in terms of injuries that we expect to sort of see and hear as far as where things go with injuries on the Georgia front. That is a very good question there, Becky. William, to answer your question, Kirby will be speaking on Tuesday. I've not looked at the full schedule yet, but I have to believe he will be speaking at some point on Tuesday morning. And so we'll look to hear from him then. Obviously, again, he's going to get the culture questions. That as Georgia fans, that's just sort of what has been happening this offseason. I'll be interested in seeing the tone that Kirby takes as far as discussing the program at large. Last year, he came up here and said, Georgia's not going to be hunted, and they're still going to be the hunters. And that felt like a very big statement from Kirby. And so I'll be interested in seeing what he has to say and sort of what the tone is for this team, because I think really starting now, this is where you are setting the tone and establishing the message for this 2023 team as far as where things going. Jack Moreno, yes, nobody on offense will be wearing the number 8 jersey number. Janelle Aguero will be wearing that on the defensive side of the ball. Dominic Blaylock obviously wore that last year. Talvin Phillips, this can go a number of different ways. I think Kendall Milton's going to be RB1 for Georgia this year. I think he's going to lead them in rushing. It could be Dejon Edwards, who is going to factor in quite there as well. I would expect Dejon to very much have the most number of carries this season. Whether or not he has the number of yards, we'll see. I would also think if Branson Robinson is able to get healthy, to be healthy, I think he's going to have a very large role for this Georgia team this season there as well. Let's see. Jazz Jackson asking about the left tackle position. Austin Blaski's going to play a lot there. And if I had to guess, he probably does start the season there, but I think over the course of the year, and we've seen this with Georgia in the past, most famously in the 2022 national championship game where Broderick Jones only started 4 games for Georgia that year. And that was only because Jamari Sawyer got hurt. But when Sawyer was healthy, they moved him, they kept him at left tackle, and they put Warren Erickson at guard. But then in that championship game against Alabama, Georgia needed to make a change. They moved Jamari Sawyer to right guard, and they insert Broderick Jones into the lineup. I think when it comes to winning time for Georgia this year, I would expect Ernest Green to be the guy at left tackle. But Austin Blaski is going to play a ton from them there. Amarius Mims, who I wrote about on Friday, he is going to be Georgia's right tackle, and I expect him to have a monster season there for Georgia. Let's see. Thomas, unless he just has a disaster of a fall camp, I expect it to be Carson Beck for Georgia's starting quarterback this season. I think he is certainly a guy that I'm interested in seeing what sort of the discussion is around him this week, because while he is not here, Brock Bowers is certainly going to get asked about him, and Cedric Van Pran, Georgia starting center, and then obviously Kirby Smart as well will be asked plenty about Carson Beck. He exited spring practice, I think, as the guy clearly best positioned to be Georgia starting quarterback, and I expect that to be the case when Georgia takes the team on September 2nd against UT Martin. Let's see, more comments, questions. Kyle asking about Andrew Paul. Again, by the time he takes the field in early August, it'll have been a full year after his ACL injury. He'll practice, he'll participate. Is he fully cleared yet? That's probably a question that is worth asking Kirby Smart, given that he was not for spring practice, but that is certainly a guy to ask about there as well. But I think, as we mentioned earlier, the 2 big names to know there are obviously Shema Munden and Branson Robinson. Keith Lamb asking about the tight end position. Oscar Delp is the obvious name. And look, Georgia's not going to be in 2 tight end, 12 personnel as much as they were a season ago. 63% of the time they were in that. Essentially, that was their base formation last year. Because they're deeper at receiver this year, because they don't have, I think, the blocking edge that they did with Darnell a season ago, they're not going to be in 2 tight end personnel as much, but that's still going to be a wrinkle in this offense. Oscar Delp, I think, is going to play a big role this season, but Lawson Lucky is a guy who probably had the best spring of any freshman, came in, played hard right away. Lawson Lucky is a guy that plays on special teams, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Oscar Delp, who, again, a very good, very talented player, if Oscar Delp isn't on his game and given 100%, Lawson Lucky is going to make things very difficult for him. And so Georgia, I think, while it's not as deep as a room it was a season ago, just because they had so many bodies in there and they really only have 4 scholarship tight ends right now, and obviously one of them being Brock Bowers, the best tight end in the country and the best player in the SEC this season. While it's not as deep as a room, it is still, in my opinion, just as talented. Let's see. Yeah, David, I think this is a good question here as far as inside linebacker, if it's not Schmile. I think right now I would say maybe Xavier Sori. I'll be interested in seeing the development of Jalen Walker this fall, where Georgia chooses to use him, how they choose to use him. Obviously, he's going to play a role for this team. He's too talented not to. But based off of spring, Sori was that guy, and he's a guy who made strides this spring. EJ Lightsey is a big name to know there as well. And so, well, obviously, if you're Georgia, you want Shema Munden on the field. I think especially with Georgia's early season schedule being what it is, I think it's an interesting chance to sort of find out what you have in guys like Sorcy and Jalen Walker who haven't played at that position on a high level yet. And so I think it'll be interesting to see that there. Jack Moreno, this will probably be our last question here for tonight. Yes, I do think you're going to see Javon Bullard in a different role compared to where he was at the star position a season ago. I going to see Javon playing in the safety spot that was occupied by Chris Smith last season. To start the year, you're going to see Tyke Smith, but keep an eye on freshman Janelle Aguero. I think from a physical standpoint, he was one of the more impressive early enrollees and a guy that came in and I think is going to play a big role for Georgia this season. And so I think maybe while Tyke Smith is going to start at that star position to start the year, I think as the year progresses and develops, I do think that Janelle Aguero is going to factor in big there at that star position, with Javon Bullard moving over to the safety spot, a guy that was playing his best football at the end of the 2022 season. And so, look, that's going to do it for us here tonight at DawgNation, but you've got Brandon Adams tomorrow morning. Mike Griffith and I are probably going to do something tomorrow evening as well. He's obviously got his On the Beat show, sort of recapping day one, where Greg Sankey, Brian Kelly speak, and then obviously previewing what Georgia's going to go through on Tuesday. We're definitely going to do a show Tuesday night, wrapping things up, and then probably on Wednesday as well there. So Kirby speaks on Tuesday. SEC predicted order of finish comes out on Friday, as do all SEC teams. We're going to have you covered from right now in Nashville all the way through the end of the week. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been Connor in Coverage.